There are moments when the universe moves so quietly that almost nobody recognizes the shift until their entire reality has already changed. And today, May 14th, is one of those moments. On the surface, this day may appear ordinary, another sunrise, another cycle, another collection of routine thoughts moving through the human mind. But beneath that appearance, something incredibly exact is unfolding in the sky. Something so mathematically precise that ancient astrologers would have stopped everything to observe it. And whether you realize it consciously or not, part of you has already sensed the pressure building. You have felt the strange tension beneath your thoughts, the feeling that something enormous has been approaching just outside your field of vision. Maybe you have been unable to focus on meaningless conversations lately. Maybe distractions suddenly feel exhausting. Maybe you keep revisiting the same questions deep inside yourself, wondering why certain patterns refuse to leave your life. That is not random. That is the atmosphere before revelation. Because what is occurring today is not simply Mercury behaving like Mercury. This is not just another passing alignment that disappears without consequence. This is a complete recalibration of perception itself, a reset point for the mind, for your inner truth, for the direction your soul has been trying to move toward for far longer than you realize. And the reason this feels so overwhelming is because the answers you have been chasing are no longer hiding in the distance. They are already surrounding you, waiting for the exact cosmic moment when your awareness becomes capable of receiving them. Today, the Sun and Mercury unite in perfect alignment on May 14th, not approximately, not symbolically, but with astonishing precision down to the very minute. In ancient astrology, this was known as a kazimi, a sacred condition where a planet enters directly into the heart of the Sun itself. Most people misunderstand this phenomenon because they assume closeness to the Sun destroys planetary energy. Normally, that is true. Normally, planets become weakened, drowned beneath solar fire, unable to express themselves clearly. But the kazimi is different. The kazimi is the exception that changes everything. Instead of being consumed, the planet is elevated. Instead of being overpowered, it is enthroned. And today, the planet receiving that coronation is Mercury, ruler of thought, language, memory, decisions, perception, and inner dialogue. Which means this alignment is not merely influencing communication. It is transforming the architecture of consciousness itself. This is why you may feel like you are standing at the edge of a doorway, without fully understanding where it leads. Part of your mind already knows a threshold is approaching. Part of your spirit recognizes that the version of you who existed before this moment cannot continue operating in the same way afterward. And the unsettling part is that the shift may happen suddenly. A realization may arrive without warning. A memory may suddenly connect to something you never understood before. A truth you avoided for months or even years may become impossible to deny any longer. Because this alignment is not delivering ordinary insight. It is revealing truth powerful enough to reorganize your entire internal reality. Most people reduce Mercury to shallow symbolism, conversations, technology, messages, schedules, minor misunderstandings. But that interpretation barely scratches the surface of what Mercury truly represents. Mercury is the bridge between worlds. It governs the pathway between conscious awareness and the deeper intelligence hidden beneath it. It is the translator between the soul and the human mind. And during a kazimi, that bridge becomes completely unobstructed. Imagine static disappearing from a radio signal after months of distortion. Imagine fog dissolving from a landscape you have been trying desperately to navigate. That is what happens psychologically during this transit. The endless mental noise begins to collapse. The constant second-guessing weakens. The exhausting cycle of replaying every possible outcome finally loses control over you. Not because you suddenly became stronger overnight, but because your awareness is temporarily lifted above fragmented human fear and connected directly to solar intelligence itself. That is why today may feel almost supernatural to sensitive people. Your mind becomes less reactive and more receptive. Instead of forcing answers, you begin receiving them. Instead of obsessing over every detail, you suddenly perceive the larger pattern behind everything that has happened. The relationships that confused you, the delays that frustrated you, the opportunities that disappeared, the instincts you ignored, all of it may suddenly rearrange itself into one coherent picture. And when that happens, there is often an emotional shock that comes with it, because clarity can feel both liberating and devastating at the same time. Sometimes the truth arriving into your awareness forces you to confront how long you have betrayed your own intuition. Sometimes it reveals that the life you were trying to preserve was never aligned with who you were becoming. Sometimes it exposes how much energy you wasted searching outside yourself for permission that was supposed to come from within all along. And what makes this particular alignment even more powerful is the fact that this is a superior conjunction. Mercury is positioned on the far side of the Sun, looking back toward Earth from the widest possible perspective. This is not Mercury trapped inside daily distractions or emotional chaos. This is Mercury, elevated above the noise, observing the full landscape of your life from a higher vantage point. Which means today, your thinking may finally expand beyond survival mode. For the first time in months, perhaps even years, your mind may stop fixating on isolated problems and begin understanding timing itself. You may suddenly realize why certain doors never opened, why specific people disappeared, why your path slowed down exactly when you wanted acceleration the most. Because from the higher perspective of this alignment, what once looked like punishment may finally reveal itself as preparation. Traditional astrology teaches that when a planet comes too close to the Sun, it becomes combust, invisible beneath overwhelming light, stripped of clarity and strength. The image often used was a candle flame disappearing inside a massive fire. But the kazimi breaks that rule completely. When a planet enters within 17 minutes of arc from the Sun, an almost impossibly exact alignment, it crosses into sacred territory. It no longer burns. It enters the throne room itself. It sits inside the heart of the king and receives direct empowerment from the source of all light. That is the condition Mercury enters today. Your thoughts are not being overwhelmed by solar intensity, they are being purified through it, elevated by it, strengthened by it. This is the difference between confusion and authority, between insecurity and certainty, between borrowing truth from others and finally trusting your own mind without apology. And the people who consciously align themselves with this energy today may notice something deeply unsettling, but also incredibly empowering. Their tolerance for self-deception begins disappearing. Conversations that once felt acceptable suddenly feel empty. Half-truths become unbearable. Performative versions of identity start collapsing under pressure. Because once Mercury is crowned inside the heart of the Sun, the mind no longer wants distraction. It wants authenticity. It wants coherence. It wants alignment between what you know internally and what you express externally. And that realization alone has the power to change everything that comes next. What begins changing today will not always announce itself loudly. In fact, for many people, the transformation starts in silence, in the strange realization that their thoughts suddenly carry a different kind of gravity. Conversations begin to feel sharper. Words stop drifting aimlessly and start landing with force. Ideas that once felt tangled or uncertain suddenly become precise, almost unnervingly direct. It is as if something inside the mind has been recalibrated overnight. You may notice yourself seeing through performances more easily. Excuses that once sounded convincing now feel transparent. Situations that kept you trapped in confusion suddenly reveal their core truth with surgical clarity. And the reason this feels so intense is because this alignment is not merely helping you understand something. It is establishing authority within your perception. This is not ordinary mental clarity. This is the emergence of a kind of inner knowing that no longer depends on approval, reassurance, or outside validation to survive. But before you mistake this energy for something comforting, there is an important reality you need to face. The truth arriving through this Sun and Mercury fusion carries weight, real weight. Because this alignment is not occurring in a playful or emotionally gentle region of the zodiac, it is happening at 23 degrees of Taurus, a degree governed by Saturn itself. And that changes the entire emotional texture of what unfolds today. Taurus usually seeks peace, security, physical comfort, stability, pleasure, predictability. It wants life to feel safe and grounded. But the final 10 degrees of Taurus operate differently. This is where Saturn enters the landscape and removes illusion. Here, comfort is no longer the goal, endurance becomes the lesson. Strength becomes the requirement. Emotional maturity becomes unavoidable, which means the truths emerging today may not feel easy to carry. Some of you will feel them like pressure in your chest. Others may experience them as a quiet sadness that suddenly forces honesty where denial once existed. Because Saturnian truth is never concerned with what feels pleasant. It is concerned with what is sustainable, what is structurally sound, what can survive reality, instead of merely escaping from it. And that is why this day may feel emotionally heavier than expected, not because something bad is happening, but because your consciousness is being asked to stop negotiating with illusions. There is also another layer, intensifying this exact moment, something hidden within the ancient fixed stars that most people never even think to examine. This alignment is sitting directly upon the fixed star known as Zaurak. In ancient astrology, Zaurak carried deeply Saturnian symbolism. It was associated with melancholy, emotional burden, psychological heaviness, and the confrontation with endings that cannot be avoided forever. But what most modern interpretations fail to understand is that Zaurak is not inherently destructive. It does not appear simply to create suffering. Its purpose is initiation through truth. It asks whether you are emotionally mature enough to carry what is about to be revealed. Because some realizations change you permanently. Some truths cannot be unknown once they arrive, and when they surface, they demand adulthood from the soul. They demand that you stop pretending everything is stable when part of you already knows the structure is cracking beneath the surface. This is why certain people may feel emotionally exposed today. The distractions that once kept them numb may suddenly stop working. The constant need to stay busy may begin collapsing. Deep down, many people already know what they have been avoiding. They know which relationship no longer reflects who they are. They know which dream has expired. They know which fear has quietly controlled their decisions for years. But until now, they could still hide inside noise and distraction. This alignment removes that protection. And while that may sound frightening, it also carries incredible power for those willing to face it honestly. Because the people who embrace this energy instead of resisting it will feel something extraordinary awaken within them. Not loud confidence, not ego-driven certainty. Something deeper, a calm resilience, a quiet authority, the kind of strength that no longer panics in the presence of difficult truth. The ability to look directly at the darkest parts of a situation and say, I understand now. And because I understand, I can finally decide what happens next. That is the real gift hidden inside this alignment. It is not emotional comfort. It is emotional sobriety. And once that sobriety arrives, the first major message of this transit becomes impossible to ignore. Stop obsessing over the details. Earlier, there was a feeling building inside you the sensation that you were standing at the edge of something massive but could not fully see its shape yet. This is why. Because Mercury, through this superior conjunction, is positioned on the far side of the Sun, looking back toward Earth from the widest possible cosmic perspective. Symbolically, this creates an enormous psychological shift. Your awareness is no longer trapped at ground level. You are being lifted above the immediate chaos of your life so you can finally understand the larger pattern underneath it all. For weeks, maybe even months, your mind has likely been trapped inside microscopic thinking, replaying conversations, overanalyzing outcomes, worrying about timing, trying to control every detail because uncertainty made you uncomfortable. You may have convinced yourself that if you thought hard enough, prepared enough, or anticipated every possible scenario, you could finally feel safe. But this alignment interrupts that cycle completely. Today, the universe pulls your consciousness upward. Suddenly, you begin seeing your life from a higher altitude. And from that perspective, something startling happens. The tiny details that once consumed you lose some of their emotional power, not because they were meaningless, but because you finally realize they were never the central story. The real story was always the direction your soul was moving toward. The real story was the pattern unfolding beneath every delay, every detour, every painful pause. And when you finally see the full landscape instead of isolated moments, many of the frustrations that once felt personal begin revealing themselves differently. The setbacks that hurt you, the plans that collapsed, the opportunities that disappeared just when you thought they were finally arriving. None of those moments were random punishments. They were recalibrations, rearrangements, necessary shifts occurring behind the scenes so the larger structure of your life could eventually align correctly. And this realization may hit harder than anything else today, because part of you may suddenly understand that what you called failure was often protection. What you called rejection was often redirection. What you called delay was often divine timing, refusing to let you settle for something smaller than what was actually meant for you. But there is another layer to this day that makes the message even more urgent. This Sun and Mercury fusion is taking place during the balsamic moon phase, the final and darkest portion of the lunar cycle, only 2 days before the new moon in Taurus arrives. Astrologically, the balsamic phase is associated with endings, release, surrender, closure, purification. It is the moment before rebirth, where the soul is asked to empty itself of what can no longer continue into the next chapter. Which means the broader perspective arriving today comes with a requirement. You cannot carry old obsessions into the next cycle and still expect clarity to remain intact. You cannot continue gripping every fear, every overanalysis, every compulsive need for certainty, while simultaneously trying to step into a higher understanding of your life. One must be released for the other to emerge. And that is the deeper emotional crossroads hidden inside this alignment. The universe is not simply offering you insight. It is asking whether you are finally willing to let go of the mental patterns that kept you emotionally trapped for far too long. There comes a moment during certain cosmic alignments when the universe quietly forces a decision that can no longer be postponed, and today is one of those moments. You cannot continue trying to rise into a wider perspective while still gripping every tiny fear that keeps your nervous system trapped in survival mode. Those two energies cannot coexist forever. Eventually, something breaks. Eventually, the soul becomes exhausted from carrying worries that were never meant to control your life in the first place. And today, under this extraordinary alignment, that breaking point begins arriving for many people. Some of you are about to realize how much of your mental energy has been consumed by the illusion of control. You have been trying to predict every outcome, prepare for every disappointment, calculate every possible scenario before it happens. Deep down you believed that if you worried enough, if you stayed mentally alert enough, you could somehow prevent pain from entering your life. But instead of creating safety, it created exhaustion. Instead of bringing clarity, it trapped you inside endless cycles of over-analysis. There are people listening to this right now who have spent months replaying the same fears over and over again in their mind, convincing themselves that constant mental pressure was responsibility, when in reality it was fear disguised as preparation. And the terrifying part of letting go is that part of you honestly believes everything will collapse if you stop obsessing for even a moment. But this alignment is here to reveal something deeper. Your life was never meant to be micromanaged from a place of anxiety. The more tightly you grip every detail, the less space you leave for the larger intelligence of the universe to actually guide you. And that is why today carries such a powerful emotional confrontation. Because the wider perspective, trying to enter your awareness, requires sacrifice. You cannot step into macro-level understanding while remaining emotionally addicted to micro-level fear. Something must be surrendered. For some people, it will be the compulsive need to control outcomes. For others, it will be attachment to identities that no longer reflect who they truly are. For others, it will be the exhausting habit of shrinking themselves emotionally just to maintain temporary peace with people who were never capable of truly seeing them. And the truth is, the moment you stop trying to control every single detail, something unexpected begins happening inside you. Space opens. Breathing becomes easier. Intuition becomes louder. You begin sensing guidance that anxiety had been drowning out for months. Because the universe can only redirect your path when your hands are no longer clenched tightly around what is already falling apart. One of the harshest truths hidden inside today's alignment is this: real security is not created by avoiding discomfort. Most people spend years building false versions of safety. They stay inside relationships that quietly drain their spirit, because at least those relationships feel familiar. They remain trapped inside careers that look stable externally, even while their soul feels numb internally. They silence difficult conversations because temporary harmony feels easier than emotional honesty. But none of that creates true stability. It only delays collapse. And today, the cosmos begins exposing the difference between comfort and integrity. This Sun and Mercury fusion is unfolding in Taurus, the zodiac sign connected to material security, self-worth, possessions, financial stability, and the emotional need to feel grounded in reality. Yet because this alignment occurs inside the Saturn-ruled decan of Taurus, the type of security being offered today is not soft or comforting. It is earned through confrontation. It is the kind of stability that only appears after illusion has been stripped away completely. Saturn does not reward avoidance. Saturn rewards honesty. And with the fixed star Zaurak sitting directly on this degree, the emotional intensity surrounding these realizations becomes impossible to ignore. Zaurak carries themes of fear surrounding survival itself, fear of losing what you built, fear of instability, fear that if certain structures disappear, you will not know who you are without them. This is why many people may feel emotionally raw today without fully understanding why. Because deep beneath the surface, the soul knows a confrontation with truth is approaching. Some people are being forced to admit that they have been surviving instead of truly living. Others are realizing that the identity they carefully maintained for years no longer matches the person they are becoming internally. And these realizations can feel heavy because they challenge the very foundations people once depended upon emotionally. But this is the paradox hidden inside Saturnian transformation. Real stability only becomes possible when you stop protecting what is already broken. Saturn does not strengthen false foundations. It dismantles them, so something real can finally be built in their place. Which means today, may bring moments of radical honesty that cannot be reversed once they arrive. A relationship may suddenly reveal its emotional truth. A career path may expose how disconnected you have become from your deeper purpose. A pattern of behavior you kept excusing may suddenly appear impossible to tolerate any longer. And when these truths surface, you will stand at a crossroads. One path leads back into denial, minimization, rationalization, the attempt to silence what your soul already knows. The other path demands courage. It demands that you acknowledge the truth openly, speak it clearly, and eventually act upon it, even if doing so disrupts the life you have grown comfortable inside. And this is where the deeper spiritual force of the Buddha Adicha yoga becomes activated today. When the Sun and Mercury unite in perfect alignment, something extraordinary emerges within human consciousness. The Sun governs identity, dignity, selfhood, authenticity, and the inner authority of the soul. Mercury governs language, thought, communication, perception, and intellectual expression. When these two forces merge harmoniously, they create the power to speak from complete alignment with your truth. Not performative confidence, not defensive communication, real authority. The kind that no longer needs endless explanation because it carries energetic conviction naturally. Many people today may notice that they suddenly stop apologizing for what they know internally. They stop over-explaining themselves. They stop seeking permission to feel what they feel. Because when truth aligns fully with identity, communication changes completely. Words begin carrying weight without force. Presence becomes stronger without aggression. And those who consciously step into this energy may make decisions over the next few days that would have terrified them only a short time ago. Boundaries they avoided setting suddenly become necessary. Attachments they clung to suddenly become impossible to maintain. Situations they tolerated for years may abruptly reveal themselves as incompatible with the future trying to emerge through them. And although these choices may initially feel frightening, something deeper begins awakening underneath the fear. The realization that true security is not found in avoiding storms. It is found in becoming emotionally strong enough to survive them without abandoning yourself in the process. This leads directly into the most intense layer of today's alignment, the symbolic message hidden within the exact 23rd degree of Taurus itself. In the Sabian symbol system, every zodiac degree carries an archetypal image that reveals the psychological essence of that energy. The image associated with this degree is powerful, raw, and deeply confrontational. An Indian warrior riding fiercely with human scalps hanging from his belt. On the surface, this imagery can feel shocking, even disturbing. But spiritually, this symbol is not about physical violence. It represents the battle for sovereignty over the self. It represents the fierce internal war required to reclaim your mind, your emotional territory, your spiritual identity from everything that once controlled it. The scalps hanging from the warrior's belt are not symbols of conquered external enemies. They represent the old identities that had to die for your authentic self to emerge. The people-pleasing masks you wore to survive emotionally. The outdated beliefs that kept you small. The fearful versions of yourself that sacrificed truth for approval. The exhausted identities that kept adapting themselves to environments that no longer honored their spirit. This symbol appears today because the universe is asking a difficult question. Are you finally ready to stop betraying yourself in order to maintain false peace? Because transformation at this level is not gentle. It requires courage, fierce enough to release every version of yourself that was built from fear instead of truth. And now the alignment becomes personal in a way that cannot be ignored anymore. Because the Sun and Mercury merging at this exact degree is no longer speaking in abstract spiritual language. It is asking you something direct, uncomfortable, and deeply revealing. What are you still carrying that no longer belongs in your life? Not what feels familiar, not what other people expect you to keep carrying, what truly belongs to you now. Because there is a difference, and many people do not realize how much of their identity was built out of survival instead of truth, until a transit like this forces them to look honestly at themselves. Some of you are still carrying versions of yourself that were created to earn love from people who never fully understood you. Some are carrying family expectations that shaped every major decision they made, even though their soul quietly resisted the entire time. Others are carrying the voices of people who wounded them years ago: critics, former partners, authority figures, parents, teachers, all of those old echoes still living inside the mind, still determining what feels possible and what feels forbidden. There are people listening right now who still hesitate every time they are about to fully express themselves, because somewhere deep inside, they were taught that taking up space was dangerous. They learned to shrink their desires. They learned to soften their voice. They learned to apologize for ambition, power, emotion, intelligence, sensitivity, and authenticity. Over time, that conditioning became so normal, they stopped recognizing it as conditioning at all. It simply became their personality. But this warrior energy moving through today's alignment is here to interrupt that illusion completely. Because one of the most important truths arriving through this Sun and Mercury fusion is this: you were never too much. You were never wrong for wanting more from your life. And you are not selfish for refusing to continue sacrificing your spirit just to keep other people comfortable. The reason this realization feels so emotionally intense is because the kazimi amplifies Mercury with extraordinary authority. When Mercury sits inside the heart of the Sun, the mind stops seeking constant permission from the outside world. Something inside begins recognizing its own legitimacy. You stop asking whether your truth is acceptable. You stop negotiating with instincts you already know are real. And for many people, this may feel both empowering and terrifying at the same time, because once authentic clarity arrives, pretending becomes exhausting. Today, some people may feel a sudden, overwhelming urge to finally say what they have been suppressing for months or even years. Others may feel compelled to make decisions they kept delaying out of fear. A relationship that has been draining life force instead of nourishing it may suddenly feel impossible to continue tolerating. A career path that once seemed practical may suddenly reveal how disconnected it has made you from yourself internally. A repetitive emotional pattern may finally expose the hidden exhaustion it has caused beneath the surface. And when these urges arise today, it is important to understand where they are actually coming from. This is not reckless ego searching for destruction. This is the deeper self-recognizing misalignment and refusing to compromise with it any longer. The warrior archetype connected to this degree does not operate through hesitation. It does not constantly seek reassurance before taking action. It sees truth clearly and moves accordingly. And today, that same energetic potential becomes available to anyone courageous enough to trust what they already know internally. But there is another layer to this alignment that makes today especially critical. The energy of a kazimi is incredibly powerful, yet it is also temporary. This exact fusion between the Sun and Mercury only lasts for a short window of time. The highest concentration of clarity, truth, and mental authority rises during the morning of May 14th and fades again by the night, which means this is not energy designed for endless contemplation. It is an opening, a threshold, a moment where the universe briefly removes distortion so you can finally see clearly enough to choose your next direction consciously. And the timing surrounding this alignment makes its significance even more profound. Only 2 days later, on May 16th, the new moon in Taurus arrives. Astrologically, the new moon represents initiation, planting seeds, beginning a new cycle of manifestation and experience. But the quality of what begins during that new moon depends entirely on the truth you are willing to face during today's kazimi. Because if you ignore what is being shown to you now, If fear convinces you to remain inside the same emotional patterns, the same self-betrayal, the same denial, then the new moon will simply reinforce the old structure instead of creating transformation. But if you listen to what is being revealed today, if you allow yourself to act on the clarity arriving now, then the new moon becomes something entirely different. It becomes the beginning of a completely new reality, built from honesty instead of avoidance. And the acceleration does not stop there. Immediately after the new moon, on May 17th, Mercury leaves Taurus and enters Gemini, where it collides directly with Uranus, the planet associated with sudden awakening, breakthroughs, revolution, and radical change. Which means the slow realization emerging through today's alignment will not remain slow for long. The truths received now quickly evolve into movement. Insight becomes action. Clarity becomes disruption. Internal awakening becomes external transformation. What begins as realization today may become a life-changing decision only days later. But all of that depends on whether you use this current window wisely. And perhaps the deepest reason this entire sequence feels so emotionally charged is because part of you already knows you are not the same person you were only a month ago. This entire month of May has been preparing your consciousness for this exact turning point. The emotional intensity you felt earlier in the month was not random. The strange synchronicities, the recurring emotional themes, the feeling that reality itself was trying to communicate with you through patterns and repetition. All of it was preparation for this moment of integration. Earlier in May, Mercury formed difficult aspects to Pluto, forcing deep psychological excavation. Hidden fears surfaced. Shadow material emerged. Old power dynamics revealed themselves in painful ways. Many people were forced to confront truths they desperately wanted to avoid. Then Pluto stationed retrograde, turning all of that intensity inward. Suddenly the battle was no longer external. It became internal. People were confronted with their own unconscious patterns, their own emotional wounds, their own buried fears surrounding control, survival, rejection, and identity. But then the energy slowly shifted. The Sun and Mercury both formed harmonious alignments to Jupiter in Cancer, expanding emotional understanding and offering a wider philosophical perspective. What once felt meaningless began revealing hidden purpose. The struggle began teaching wisdom instead of only pain. And now today, during this extraordinary Sun and Mercury kazimi, every piece of that process comes together into one moment of profound realization. The shadow work was not pointless, the emotional pain was not wasted, the confusion was not punishment. It was preparation for clarity, powerful enough to permanently change how you see yourself and your future. That is why today feels like crossing a finish line. You did not even realize you were approaching. Something inside you has already transformed. Today simply allows you to finally recognize it consciously. Some people will move through May 14th completely unaware of what is happening above them. They will continue living inside distraction, routine, and emotional numbness, without ever noticing that a rare cosmic coronation unfolded directly over their lives. But you are not here accidentally. Something inside you was already listening before this moment arrived. And when the truth surfaces today, you will recognize it immediately. It will not feel like ordinary thinking. It will feel ancient, deep, cellular, the kind of knowing that enters the body before the mind can logically explain it. And when that moment arrives, the real question is not whether the truth is real. The real question is whether you are finally willing to act on it. Will you speak what you know? Will you release what no longer belongs to your future? Will you finally claim the life your soul has been trying to move toward? Or will fear convince you to hesitate one more time? Because moments like this are rare, the universe does not open these doors constantly. And when it does, it is usually because the soul has already spent months preparing itself to walk through them. You have been asking for clarity. You have been praying for direction. You have been searching for signs that your transformation was real. And today, the answer arrives. So remain awake to what you feel. Pay attention to what rises inside you, because the truth you have been waiting to hear is no longer approaching from the distance. It is already finding its way toward you now. And once it arrives, nothing inside your life remains exactly the same again. If you stayed with this message until the very end, thank you for sharing this space and energy. And if this resonated deeply with your spirit, and you want to continue exploring these cosmic shifts together, consider subscribing so you do not miss what comes next. I would also love to hear what this alignment awakened inside you, so feel free to share your thoughts and experiences below. Until next time, stay conscious, stay grounded, and continue listening closely to the signs unfolding around you.